I sometimes have trouble, when you talk to people that are on the other side that support Ukraine, the band of rights, or you talk to Zionists, people that support Netanyahu and what Israel's doing, it's very difficult for me to have this conversation with people without being emotional. It's such a hard thing, especially because if you we've talked about it so much, and we've come to the conclusion what Israel's doing in Gaza is a genocide. I've just seen so many videos of children blown apart, and I've seen these videos of the atrocities in Kursk, and it's just, but clearly these people that support Israel and support Ukraine, most of them, they're not bad people. They're not
By and
necessarily
large, I think that's certainly true. We always have to remind ourselves of that.
right. But how do you have a dialogue with somebody that is supportive of that? I always have trouble with that, and I get too worked up, and then they throw something, and it's like,
Yeah.
should I even try? Maybe I don't try. I mean, like,
Yeah, it's rough. I think a big part of the problem is that we really inhabit different realities. A lot of these people have simply rely on mainstream news sources, where the worst atrocities, the dead kids in Gaza, for example, um, are hidden from them. They really just don't see it, and they're also kind of constantly being immunized against um, our arguments. It's because sometimes they'll watch whether it's CNN or MSNBC. MSNBC, it has to be said, has had a few, occasionally breaks ranks, but by and large, you're going to get even on Gaza or Palestine, you're going to get the mainstream narrative. But if they're watching mainstream news, getting their information from mainstream news sources, they will occasionally hear, oh, there are those people out there that say this, that uh, present this counter argument or make these claims on behalf of the Palestinians or on behalf of the Russians. But that's ridiculous for these reasons. So they actually are being even immunized against our arguments to a certain extent. Now they're not getting so they're not being exposed to certain realities. They're being immunized against counter arguments, and then they're constantly being propagandized. They're also constantly hearing, that again, basically Hamas is a terrible terrorist organization. Putin is a mad dictator, and they hear it again and again. It's hard to let go, and it just seems like all kinds of people. You switch channels or whatever, they're all saying it, so it just must be true. That just becomes their reality. And then when they come up against somebody like you, they've been told there are people like you out there, and just don't pay any attention to them because they're being fed Russian misinformation, or they're anti-Semites or something like that. It's a hard obstacle to overcome. I mean, you're going up against a lot. Sort of like these people have been trained and propagandized, to not to be receptive to your arguments. Um,
yeah, it
yeah,
sucks.
I've had my own experience. One thing, yeah, it actually is not to your benefit, though. I would say to get emotional. I know that's hard. When I was younger, I remember getting in an argument with somebody about Palestine. This was a long time ago, like I guess in the early 1990s. So it shows, my connection to Palestine goes pretty far back. Um, but I just lost my cool. I just started shouting. It ended very badly, let's say. And I certainly didn't convince anybody.
Start throwing fists.
No, I didn't get that far. But then, more recently, I had a conversation with a friend, a real discussion. And we were in complete agreement about Palestine. But when it came to Russia, we were at opposite poles. And I was just talking to him, I bring up these things, and he just said like he never heard of it. Even these things that have been actually published in places like the New York Times. For example, the New York, I mentioned that the New York Times had actually published that the CIA had found that Navalny had died for medical reasons. He hadn't been killed by the Russians, but that never made it into the narrative. And it's just like, unless you're reading the back pages of these newspapers and really studying it, you're just never going to know any of these things. And he didn't. He's a very smart guy, but I just, what's going on, I was just like, we were just coming from different planets. But it was, maybe something got through because I did have command of the facts. I knew a lot of stuff, and he just kind of continually was expressing surprise. I never heard of that. And so maybe he'll reflect on it. Maybe he'll do some of his own research. I didn't get too emotional. We're still very good friends. It's
Yeah,
so,
you never. I feel like you never lose your cool. I wish I could have been there.
Oh no, when I was
early
younger,
1990s.
yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah.
Even more recently, I can lose my cool, but I'm certainly less likely to do it now that I'm an old codger now.